Hello and welcome to another edition of the Middle East Report. In this edition we'll be focusing on the great news that the whole of Israel is rejoicing at the prospects of Gilad Shalit being released after 5 years of captivity by Hamas. We'll be discussing the recent plans by the Palestinian Authority to declare an independent Palestinian state at the UN. We'll be discussing what the implications of this for Israel and for the Middle East peace process. We'll be discussing the threat of Iran and also be discussing, does Israel get a fair hearing in Parliament? And as Christians, what can we do to stand with Israel and the Jewish people in their hour of need? And today I'm joined by a very special guest, a very prominent Jewish journalist, Jerry Lewis from Israel Radio. Jerry, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the Middle East Report today.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. Jerry, can you tell us a little bit about something about yourself and how you got involved in journalism and media, how you got involved in Parliament and how you became such a strong advocate for Israel in the Jewish community?
Well, I started off basically at school days running a school newspaper. At university, even though I didn't get involved in the major university newspaper, I was doing a news sheet for the Jewish community and Jewish students. And while at university, I became far more involved in Israel matters. I joined the local representative council for the Jewish community, representing all the students. And I remember very distinctly, we had a major issue when Iraq decided to hang a number of Jews. And there were plans to take a bus down to London to join the national demonstration. And I said, why should we, Jewish students in Manchester, be going down to London for a demonstration like that? Let's do our own one in Albert Square in Manchester. That would be far more significant. And you don't need to guess. The front page of the following day's Guardian newspaper, Manchester Guardian, had our torches, our demonstration on their front page, us students claiming that the hangings done by the Iraqis were completely out of order. We had a massive worldwide splash, and from there onwards I knew my involvement both in the Jewish community and then later in journalism would grow. I subsequently, just after I finished my degree, met Greville Janner, who became just recently Lord Janner, but he was then a very active member of Parliament and involved in the Soviet Jewry movement. He and I agreed that it would be useful, having studied politics as I had done at university, to come down to London and work for him as his assistant. And I did so for the best part of a couple of years. Then I went to live in Israel for a brief spell, did some other jobs, and ended up as a lobby correspondent for Israel Radio, based in the House of Commons. And in fact, I'm the only overseas journalist directly based in the House of Commons. I'm very proud of it.
And what does it feel like to work in Parliament? And what does your role as a lobby journalist for Israel Radio actually involve?
I listen, I watch, I communicate, I hear what's going on. I'm in close touch with the Foreign Office, number 10 Downing Street, and other government departments. And when there's going to be a statement, or when there's going to be an interview to be done, I'm around and available to do it. I cover meetings in Parliament, which is very useful, so I can hear what's being said, not only by those in favour of Israel, but Israel's opponents. You have to understand and follow what Israel's opponents say to get a measure of what their argument is, how they're deploying their arguments, what their next part of their campaign is. And it's useful. I can give you a very simple example. There was the famous occasion when, at a Palestine Solidarity campaign meeting, some backbench Liberal Democrat MP called Jenny Tong decided to have a little rant about Israel and how had she been living in Israel or been a Palestinian woman, might have wanted to become a suicide bomber. And just in front of her, closer than you are to me, was my little tape recorder on which I recorded her saying this. The tape managed to find its way to Sky and BBC. I know they're not as big as Revelation TV, but they were important TV outlets. And the news came out the following day that she had made this comment. She was immediately sacked as a front bencher. Since then, every meeting she sees me turning up, she says, Jerry, have you got your tape recorder? Are you going to record me? I'm going to watch my words. But I'm there all the time to listen and watch and hear what the opposition say, just as much as anybody else, and reporting it, of course, to Israel and to the Jewish outlets in this country.
So you play a very, very vital role, really, kind of a watchman in a sense, from watching what's going on in Parliament and being able to be a very strong advocate, not only for Israel, but also for the Jewish community as well.
Yes, I try and do that, and I try not to mix one with the other. But as a journalist, I have privileged access. As a lobby correspondent, I have very special access to MPs and to ministers at any time. And whilst I don't abuse it, there will be occasions when I can have a private word with them, and all sorts of things can flow from that. There's the famous occasion some years ago when we heard that a minister was going to be seeing some leading Arabs, and it was just a few months after Gilad Shalit, who you've referred to in your opening, had been kidnapped. And I was able to brief that minister so that he could, when I say brief him, give a hint as to what was going on, so that when he met these Arab personalities, he could ask them to intercede on Gilad Shalit's behalf. I did it in the form of an interview, but it was very useful. And so I could alert him to the problem, get a good interview out of it, and it all meshed together very, very nicely. But I'm treated with respect by those who are pro-Palestinian. I've just been to the two-party conferences, Labour and Conservative. I attended all the meetings of the Palestinian lobby and was welcomed, treated with respect, allowed to record the meetings. Had I wished to ask questions, I could have done. No problem at all. And it is at least a sign that both sides of the campaign, even though they've got very strongly held views, are beginning to understand each other and reflect that sometimes hurling insults at each other is not the best way to conduct a campaign on behalf of each other.
Yeah. Very, very pragmatic. Jerry, just looking at in Parliament, I was going to ask this question later on in the interview, but I think it's very relevant to ask this now. What is the sense of feeling in both houses regarding Israel, on both sides of the house, both the Conservative Party, the coalition government, and also the Labour Party? Have you seen an increase in anti-Israel sentiment within the House over the last few years?
There's certainly been more concern about Israel's policies as expressed both by government and opposition, regardless of party, both as a result of the Lebanon issue, and that, if you recollect, was triggered by an attempt by Hezbollah to kidnap Israeli soldiers, and it led to an invasion of Lebanon. They were trying to do the same as what happened to Gilad Shalit. And then, of course, Operation Cast Lead, when Israel had no option after literally months and months of rocket attacks to go into Gaza and try and stop the ongoing rocket attacks from there. Both those triggered anti-Israel feelings, quite strong ones and passionate ones, both in the House of Commons and House of Lords. Taking the two major parties, the Conservatives, they tend to be more pro-Israel, and with their new influx of MPs after the 2010 election, there's a very solid core of solid, good friends, conservative friends of Israel. There are Israeli critics as well, but nowhere near as numerous, and they are being very well organised by Stuart Pollock, who runs Conservative Friends of Israel, and as an organisation, they are a very strong organisation. Labour Friends of Israel, on the other hand, has diminished in its ability to get its case across, mainly because they no longer have so many friends on their Labour benches, and it's been noticeable over the last 5-10 years, more of the early day motions which are put down to signify MPs' interest in a subject have been on the Palestinian side and have been signed by Labour MPs expressing pro-Palestinian views. Doesn't mean that Labour doesn't have some good stout defenders on the Labour benches, and Louise Ellman, Liverpool MP, has been one of those, and Ian Austin, another. There have been quite a few who have been very, very powerfully able to put their view across. Sadly, we lost one just a few months ago when David Cairns, who was recently the chairman, Labour Friends of Israel, he died. He was also a very powerful advocate. There are people on the Labour benches who will stand up for Israel, but there are many more critics on the Labour side in the House of Commons. On the House of Lords, it's very much a different case. There are plenty of good friends of Israel, also lots of critics. Some of those critics even former diplomats who served in the Foreign Office and are now in the House of Lords, having got their reward for doing their years of service for diplomacy. And some are friendly, some are less friendly. There's constant questions in the Lords, constant attempts to demonise Israel by 2 or 3 individual MPs, peers, mainly, sadly, Lib Dems, and they're led, sadly, by Baroness Tong, the same lady that I had my slight contretemps with a few years back. But that's how it goes, and there are plenty of peers to counterbalance what she tries to do.
But how important is it? I mean, the majority of Christians really have not engaged in the political arena. How important is it that Christians engage with their MPs and with members of the European Parliament, and also with peers in the upper house, to advocate strongly for Israel and the Jewish people?
It's a matter of not only Jews, not only people of other faiths and Christians doing it, but as many people as possible doing it. The biggest problem we have is that the civil servants who help design the policy for the ministers, they get the letters in from MPs. And the Muslim community and the pro-Palestinian lobby are far more astute and far more motivated, it would appear, to get their letters in to their MPs, asking their MPs to pass the letter on to the Foreign Secretary or Foreign Office, and it ends up that the civil servants have piles of letters saying, why don't we have a Palestinian state, there's double standards, and the number of letters from the pro-Israel side are very much reduced. Another complication is that the number of Jewish community areas which have influence on the parliamentary constituencies is very much reduced, because there are only maybe a dozen constituencies with sizable Jewish communities, and that doesn't allow for more than a dozen MPs to be touched with the subject. And this is where your programme, the Christian Friends of Israel, and other people who support Israel can be very, very helpful by writing into their MPs and just reminding them of the difficulties Israel face, and the fact that there are problems with Israel, how it's portrayed, how it's misunderstood, partially due to the media, partially due to policy, and that it needs support from the government. Those letters going in tell the civil servants that there is a support for Israel, tell the ministers there is a support for Israel, and that helps them in their battle in trying to determine policy. And I've had it from ministers on the Middle East numerous times saying, Jerry, please get people to write more letters in supporting Israel. It makes all the difference. Emails are one thing, letters are another. Letters are very much more important, far harder to lose a letter seriously than to delete an email. But the key thing is to ask the MP, and especially from those constituencies where there aren't so many Jews, or no Jews at all, ask the minister, ask the MP to supply the letter to the minister, and for the minister to give a reply, and for the MP to comment on that reply. That means the minister has to draw up a reply to the questions asked, but more important, the MP himself has to see the letter originally and has to reply to it, whatever he's going to make, whatever comment he's going to make. And it is an opening door process to say, look, MP, I've had your reply, can I come and see you? Can I discuss it? Can we form a little delegation? And it could include the local rabbi, the local imam, the local vicar, the local whatever, to go and sit down with the MP and explain Israel's predicament, and to make sure that he has a better chance to understand. Those MPs that don't have Jewish constituents tend not to know very much about the Israeli situation, and it's very, very important to get as many understanding as they can. And final point, and it is also key, there's a battle between the Labour Friends of Israel, Conservative Friends of Israel, Lib Dem Friends of Israel, and the Conservative Middle East Council, the Labour Middle East Council, the CARBU, which is the Council for Arab-British Understanding, how many MPs they can get out to the area for them to see the region for themselves. And if you look in the register of MPs' interests, you'll always see lots of MPs who've been recently, and they've registered, declared that they've been sponsored by such and such a government, be it an Arab government or whoever, or whichever organisation it is. And it shows far more than any other part of the world how many people are just involved, motivated by the pressure groups to go and see for themselves what's happening. I know that LFI and CFI make it a business not only to go just to Jerusalem and to see the Israeli sites, but to go and visit the leading Palestinians as well, so they have a chance to see both sides of the fence.
There you heard it from Jerry himself. It's important that as Christians we stand with Israel and the Jewish people. That means engaging with our MPs and writing to them on issues that are vital for Israel's security, and also vital that we make a stand and that the Jewish community know that as Christians we're standing with them, and I think this is our duty at this time. And if you want to re-record this interview, then you can go back and listen to Jerry explaining the best way to ensure that your letter actually gets to your MP, but also to your minister involved for policy regarding Israel and the Middle East. Jerry, just want to discuss probably the best news. Usually doing news, it's very much depressing, certainly when it comes to Israel. It becomes very tragic as well. But the news this week that Gilad Shalit could actually be free after 5 years of captivity held by Hamas. What do you think this means to Israel, and what does this mean to the Jewish community?
To Israelis, it's a great relief, because whilst there's never been any doubts that he was still alive, there's always been concern about his state of health. And because the Hamas, against all the rules, have never allowed any Red Cross access at all, there's always been puzzlement why they've done that. There was never thoughts that he might have been injured when he was captured, though those that he was with, one of them died, and I think, if I recall correctly, another was injured in the kidnap when it took place. But the fact is, Hamas have never given access to the Red Cross. Israel will be very relieved, but there's a very heavy price to pay. It is a controversial move. People in Israel have been prepared for it. The family have been pleading with Israeli leaders to make some gesture to the Palestinians. And the gesture is a difficult one. I'll come to the politics in a moment, but just the humanitarian issue. There are going to be 450 Palestinian prisoners released at the first tranche. Then it is understood Gilad Shalit will be released, and then another 550 plus will be set free. Many of them have been involved in directly terrorism. They have been sentenced by Israeli courts through a proper judicial system to either life imprisonment or very long periods of imprisonment. They have what is termed blood on their hands. So the victims, the families of those whose terrorism killed their relations, are mega upset, and there may yet be legal challenges to some of those who are going to be released, because it will be said they're just going to be recirculated, they're going to be able to come back and start again doing their terrorism. And that is one of the problems which Israel will not be able to deal with. It is a matter, certainly for the Jewish community in this country, one of great relief. People have been campaigning for a very long time to get these Gilad Shalit out. There are other missing Israelis in action. Some of them sadly are probably dead, but we don't know. And there are always thoughts of people like Ron Arad, the aircraft, the pilot, who sadly disappeared over Lebanon many years ago, presumed taken to Iran, never heard of again. Nobody knows. His parents still don't know what happened. His family still don't know. And it's sad that this type of thing can happen. There are two problems on the political front. First of all, it rewards Hamas. Hamas can now say, we've got 1,000. If we want to get the other 4,000 or 5,000 held by Israel, let's kidnap somebody else. Let's hold them again, and then we can get some more people out. It rewards them for terrorism. One person against 1,000 released, the numbers do not add up in any way, and it can't be justified. But Israel always has had a very strong maxim: when an Israeli soldier serves his army or her army, they will always be cared for by the army, whatever happens. So whatever occurs, Israel will do their very level best to get them back, whatever the cost. There is a precedent for this. There have been swaps before for prisoners. Israel has given over a number of prisoners in the past, so that's not unusual. Hamas haven't got everybody they wanted. They wanted Marwan Barghouti, who's been held for a long time. Israel says he's responsible for terrorism, and many others who Israel will not release. But the other political problem is that this gives a boost to Hamas and makes it harder for the Palestinian Authority, which is run by Fatah, their rivals, to have credibility. Fatah have for a long time been trying to get a prisoner swap with the Israelis, and it just hasn't yet happened. And they're going to see their influence and their power diminish as against Hamas. Now, Fatah and Hamas are at each other's necks a lot of the time, especially in Gaza, but in the West Bank, Fatah has now got virtual control of vast swathes of both the north and southern part of the West Bank. Hamas is not there to any great degree any longer. And for that reason, Fatah still can say they've got the upper hand in the West Bank. They haven't got any real depth of support in Gaza. And as long as that's the situation, there's a serious issue of who comes out top dog in the Palestinian side. But sadly, it looks as though for the moment, Hamas, there have been reports of Hamas rejoicing on the streets of Gaza at the news. And we're going to have all the photographs, all the footage of families being reunited on the Palestinian side, and there's going to be lots of them, whereas in Israel's case, it's just going to be one solitary family. And you can imagine how the families of the others who've disappeared to Hezbollah hands are going to feel about no chance of seeing their own boys returned, and also the victims of the terrorist attacks. And I've been a witness myself to many terrorist attacks in Israel. I've been there to report them. And those people at that time will feel very, very sore. But it's something which has to be done, and most Israelis understand that.
Yeah. We have a clip to go to now that shows you and talks about the suspected release of Gilad Shalit.
Gilad Shalit will return home to his family in the coming days. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said at the start of an urgent cabinet meeting convened Tuesday evening, where he informed ministers of the deal secured for the soldiers' release. Netanyahu said he had ordered the Israeli delegation charged with negotiations to initial an agreement drawn up by Hamas and mediated by Egypt last Thursday in Cairo. Tuesday's meeting occurred shortly after the Al Arabiya network quoted an unnamed source announcing that Israel and Hamas had reached a deal. Israeli officials said the deal would be carried out in stages. Israel will release 300 prisoners out of a list of 450 prisoners drawn up by Hamas, and Shalit will be transferred to Egypt and returned to Israel. At the same time, an additional 150 prisoners will then be freed, and shortly after, a batch of 550 Palestinian prisoners of Israel's choosing. Hamas officials in Gaza said a list of the prisoners' names would be published Tuesday night. The officials said that among the 1,000 to be set free are 300 prisoners sentenced to numerous life sentences in Israel for their role in terror attacks, and said that prisoners from other organizations besides Hamas will also be released. The officials hinted members of other organizations could include Fatah leader Marwan Barghouti and Ahmed Sadat, involved in the murder of former Israeli tourism minister Rehavam Ze'evi. Netanyahu stressed that a window of opportunity had been created that could shortly close due to the upheaval in the Middle East and the uncertainty concerning Arab regimes. He thanked the Egyptian government, whose efforts were instrumental in securing the deal, and also thanked Angela Merkel for allowing the German mediator to continue his efforts to secure Shalit's release. In June 2002, Gilad Shalit was deployed near the Gaza Strip when he was abducted and taken to the Gaza Strip, where he has been held incommunicado ever since.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. That clip showed the relief, I think, for Gilad Shalit's family and for the nation of Israel, that within days we will see his return home after 5 years of captivity. Jerry, the next issue I think is a very, very important issue, and this is the latest battle that Israel's involved in, and certainly within the United Nations. Now, for many of our viewers, even for myself, this whole complexities evolving around the Palestinian Declaration of Independence of the UN. I just wondered if you could simplify it for our viewers to understand why the Palestinian Authority are going to the United Nations to declare an independent state outside of negotiations with Israel. What does this mean for Israel's security, and what does this mean for the Middle East peace process?
I would think Mahmoud Abbas himself would like to hear the answers, because even he doesn't know all the answers to all those questions. He set himself out to push this issue. In fact, funnily enough, Salam Fayyad, who is the Prime Minister, outlined his plan 2 years ago, and I remember interviewing him in London when he was here, saying in 2 years' time we are going to go down this road for certain. And he's been doing all the work, Salam Fayyad has done all the work to build up the infrastructure to have a state. And so most people accept the infrastructure is there. But this is a political move. It's a political move with lots of risks. And Abbas, until literally a week before the actual start of the General Assembly meeting, still didn't know which route he was going to take. So much so that Nabil Shart, one of his chief negotiators, was in London and said, it's not clear yet what we're going to do, but we're going down this road. Was it a publicity stunt? Probably. Is it effective? Almost certainly yes, because it's put the Palestinian issue on the map. But there's an issue for the Palestinians themselves. That is, they don't know where the whole system is going to end. They could have gone to the General Assembly. It would have given them observer status. It could have meant, with observer status, that they would, A, be able to sit at the meetings, which is one thing, and they could, theoretically, but this was subject to debate, refer Israel to the International Court at The Hague for what they consider to be abuses of human rights law and the Geneva Convention, which is something that they want to do. They would get a majority there. They need a two-thirds majority, but they would easily get an ordinary majority. The last I heard was 124, 125 states out of the 193. If they went to the Security Council and they got full approval there, they would automatically be recognised as a state. But the United States has always said, we will not let you go down this road in the current circumstances unless there are direct negotiations between you and the Israelis. So Abbas knew that when he made his decision to go through the Security Council. He needs 9 countries. They are wavering between 8 or 9 at the moment. And the last I heard yesterday is they may well have got their 9th country. It's not 100% certain. But even if they do get their 9th country, which gives them a majority in the Security Council, out of the 15 seats, America's going to veto it in any case. So there's really no gain for them. It's just literally a stunt to get publicity for their campaign for statehood. But why are they going through the motions? That's the principal reason, to get the publicity. They know that it's going to be a limited success, but they're going to put extra pressure on Israel. Turning the situation round from the other side, looking at it from the other end, from the Israeli end, Israel did what the Palestinians wanted. There was a security situation which was allowed to rest. Tony Blair made some arrangements for lots of the barriers to be pulled up, demolished, and for the settlement freeze to take place. A settlement freeze was in place for the best part of a year. Did the Palestinians come to the table? They did not. When Israel got fed up of the freeze, and there are domestic reasons why Netanyahu could not continue with the freeze, as soon as that was over, he said, right, we're going to have to start allowing a small expansion of existing settlements, which includes the suburbs of Jerusalem, so that people can have natural growth. Families expand, they need somewhere to live. So those settlements will be allowed to expand. We're not going to allow any new ones, but the existing ones will be allowed. That being the case, the Palestinians said, oh, we're not going to turn up at any talks now, that's it. And the stalemate's gone on for 9 months. And the international community, led by the Quartet, have been unanimous and said, Palestinians, you want your statehood, you've got to sit and talk with the Israelis. Don't do that, you can't even get the next stage of statehood. So there's been a stalemate and a guessing game. And it was very instructive to see Netanyahu turn up in Washington just a few weeks ago, just as the General Assembly debate was starting, and have a session with Netanyahu, with Obama. And Obama actually conceded that the policy which he'd announced earlier, which was more pro-Palestinian, would now be reined in to protect Israel, to ensure that those talks do get underway. Even he realised you could not have a situation by which all the pressure's on Israel to do this when the Palestinians have got nothing to do. One other thing, and it's very, very key to all this situation, is that the Palestinians have set their demands, whatever they are, including the settlement freeze, refugees and this, that and the other, but they haven't at any time said they're prepared to sit at a table which the Israelis have kept on offering the opportunity for the Palestinians to do. And it was amazing to watch the quartet and Tony Blair and many others tell the Palestinians, do this small thing and you can get all the approval and support you need. But they haven't gone down that road. And there must be a question why the Palestinians aren't prepared to just do that extra little move to make sure that they have what they want, which is a Palestinian state. Israel is prepared to do what's necessary. Why aren't the Palestinians prepared to go that move?
Yeah. We'll come back to that very poignant question very shortly, Jerry. We're just going to go to a very quick clip that looks at the issue of the Palestinian Declaration of Independence at the United Nations.
The UN Security Council has handed the Palestinian bid for full membership of the world body to a review panel that will deliver its verdict in the coming weeks. The Palestinians currently have observer status, but want to be recognised as a member state. The US says it will veto the bid. Enhanced observer status could be an interim option that would allow the Palestinians to join UN agencies.
We're not
going to wait for all eternity. It's clear if we have the feeling that they are trying to win time by making us wait, then we have the option of going to the General Assembly, where we already have a majority. Amid the Palestinian bid for statehood, Israel has just approved the construction of 1,100 homes in East Jerusalem. The Palestinians see the eastern part of the city as the capital of a future state and say it's an illegal land grab. Israel says they're not settlements. The move has drawn a rebuke from the international community, including Russia, China and the United States.
We believe that this announcement by the government of Israel approving the construction of 11 housing units in East Jerusalem is counterproductive to our efforts to resume direct negotiations between the parties.
The US Secretary of State was speaking alongside Portuguese Foreign Minister Paulo Portas, who also criticised the Israeli decision.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. Jerry, the United States, the Quartet, the European Union, Russia, the international community are placing huge pressure upon Israel to make huge sacrifices for peace. And yet when you look at the evidence on the Palestinian side, the Palestinians themselves are preparing their people for genocide against Israel and against the Jewish people. Within their education system, within their media, is incitement to violence, teaching children as young as 2 or 3 that the highest accolade they can have within Palestinian society is to become a shaheed or a suicide bomber against Israel. How can Israel get her message across that if there's going to be peace, then peace has to be on both sides, and the Palestinians have to prepare their people for peace instead of war?
Can I just take you up on your use of the word genocide? Far be it from all Palestinians supporting the concept of genocide, there are some who are hotheads, there are some who will want to take up the stones, the rocks and the bullets and mortars and rockets and whatever, but it's not a majority. A majority of Palestinians have consistently, according to the opinion polls, said yes, they prefer to live in peace with their Israeli neighbours. Let's just wind the clock back. Prior to certainly the Yom Kippur War, there was a situation by which Palestinians worked inside Israel. They were searched, yes, before they went in, searched when they went back, but they all, a large number, worked inside Israel. They had good jobs, good money, and they were economically satisfied, and therefore weren't suffused with the necessity to get into a mode by which they would attack Israel and attack Israelis. Only hotheads were involved in that type of activity. Yes, the books are bad, not all of them. Some of them are still bad, and that's an issue which can easily be resolved. What Tony Blair, in his work for the Quartet, has found is if you improve the lot of the Palestinians in the West Bank, and their economy has grown leaps and bounds this last year and a half, 9% according to one source, 4% according to another source, over the last few months, depending on who you believe. But it's going leaps and bounds. There's money in the Palestinian economy. The Palestinians are happier. There's no need for them to get so agitated politically and no need for them to get their kids to start throwing rocks, stones, and all the other things. So there's been a sea change already in the West Bank. Were that to occur in Gaza, were a large number of the Gazan residents able to get jobs and to have money in their pockets, go back to the work they used to do in Israel and feel that they can provide for their families, a lot of the problems of the region would dissipate very, very quickly indeed. That's what Tony Blair's been trying to do. It's laudable, it's very credible, and he should be given every encouragement to carry that on. There is a gap between what the Palestinians say they want and what they want actually in reality. But what was amazing was that the leaking of the WikiLeaks papers and those in The Guardian as well on the Palestinians showed that Sir Barakat and others had negotiated far, far more in Israel's favour and towards a proper settlement than we ever imagined. Now, I remember Ehud Olmert, now discredited former Premier, telling us when he came on his visits to London, we're so close, we're so near to a final settlement with the Palestinians. It's in our grasp. We've just got to do the final bit because the Palestinians have said to us privately X, Y, and Z. It's amazing how the Palestinians have so little support from the Arab world. They have little money from the oil-rich states, little political support. The Arab countries mouth support for the Palestinian cause. They put their hands in their pockets not. And it's quite amazing that the Palestinians rely so much on the Europeans for money to keep afloat. And what's happened just recently is that the American Congress and the Senate have said, we're not going to give you any more money because you have gone down the road of seeking statehood without agreeing to negotiate with Israel. Now the Palestinians are going to start feeling the pinch very, very quickly. The money's already been switched off and the Palestinians are going to have to be dragged back to the negotiating table. And it's to this British government's credit and to many other European countries' credit, who at one stage were talking about supporting the principle of a Palestinian state, but turned around and said, negotiate, you've got to sit down with the Israelis, you've got to start talking. And if that is the pressure which could be put on, this is where your viewers can play a very important role by urging government ministers here and the international community to make sure that the Palestinians actually do turn around and say, yes, we need to negotiate. We can't just sit on the sidelines and expect it all to be landing on a plate for us. And it's one thing which the new Israeli ambassador, Daniel Taub, has pointedly said since he's been here in Britain. He said it's all well and good having the Friends of Israel and their important groups, but where are the Friends of the Palestinians? Telling them that they too have got to make sacrifices and they too have got to make changes to their policy. There needs to be a policy change from the Palestinians, and a major one, a shift by the leadership of the Palestinians while they're still in power to deliver. Once that's done, then the chances of a peace process will depend very much on the Israeli political scene, and no doubt we'll come to that in a moment.
But if we look back, Jerry, certainly the signing of the Oslo Accords in 1993 in September, there was a great hope and there was a great optimism that this would finally end the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians and bring peace to the region. But it's brought nothing but terrorism. And instead, Yasser Arafat built up a terrorist infrastructure and then in 2000 launched the Intifada against Israel, and we saw more Israelis hit by terrorism than any other period in Israel's short history. So what is the international community doing to ensure that a future Palestinian state will not become another terrorist entity designed to target and wipe out the state of Israel?
Yasser Arafat was duplicitous, no question about it at all. When they came to the Oslo Accords, if you remember, it wasn't done without American help. It was done with direct negotiations between Israelis and the Palestinians. But when the Palestinians realized how close they were getting to a deal, then the radical Palestinian groups, aided and assisted by the extremist groups, engineered by Iran and by Syrian help, started putting up strong opposition. And every time they were, even at Tava, when they were going to sign an agreement, at the last minute, the Palestinians pulled out simply because of pressure from Iran and from all the satellites and their puppets who did tremendous damage to the prospects for peace. Even in those days, there was a serious chance for peace. Arafat wasn't able ever to deliver that, but thank God, Abbas at least was in a position to get down the road where he could get to a stage and say, yes, we want to go down that road, we want to have a peace process. The trouble is, he too is now being forced by pressure from other sources to end his ideas of a direct state, simply because he's in a weakened position, he's over his time as a president, nobody knows if he's going to stand again, even if he did stand again, whether he'd be re-elected. Somebody else might get in, and somebody else does get in. With all the turmoil in the rest of the Arab world, nobody can predict what's going to happen.
Very much so, which leads us on to our next clip, which is entitled Axis of Terrorism, Iran, Hezbollah and Hamas, and they pose the real threat to peace and security in the Middle East.
The 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. were the worst tragedy in the history of terrorism, spurring unprecedented outrage and solidarity among the world's civilized nations. From the Pandora's box of radical Islam had emerged a wave of Islamic terrorism aimed at so-called infidels.
وإذا كانت اليوم هي عاصمة الكاثوليك وعما قريب إن شاء الله ستفتح روما كما فتحت القسطنطينية ستكون عاصمتهم نقطة متقدمة للفتوحات الإسلامية التي تنساح في أوروبا كلها ثم تلتفت إلى الأمريكتين بل إلى أوروبا الشرقية.
Faced with the severity of the new threat, the targeted countries forged an alliance for self-defense and national security, and an international war on terrorism was launched. While Al-Qaeda claimed undisputed celebrity status for the 9/11 attacks, it is only one member of a much larger family of radical Islamic organizations. Among them is Hamas. While less familiar to the world beyond the context of its conflict with Israel, Hamas is an integral part of the Islamic terrorism network and one of the cornerstones of the terrorist triad that also includes Hezbollah and Iran. Hamas has a long heritage of terrorist activity and is recognized as one of the world's most extreme, dangerous organizations. In the organizational pyramid of terror made up by these three groups, Iran sits at the top, serving as the ideological leader for its two proxy armies, conveniently positioned along Israel's borders. As the ideological mentor of both Hamas in the Palestinian territories and Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iran provides them with indoctrination, training, financing, weapons, and intelligence. Hezbollah and Hamas leaders are frequent and welcome visitors to Tehran, where Iran's religious mullahs set the ideological tone. A tone which is translated into uncompromising terrorist policies to be applied in their respective theaters of operation.
دورات بغيت لبنان مش دورات عملت مناورة. عملت مناورة بغيت مناورة. امتى كانت أول مناورة؟ آخر 2003. وين عملتها؟ بإيران.
In a recent interview with Britain's Sunday Times newspaper, a Hamas operative revealed the depth of Iran's role as mentor to the terrorist organization, stating, "Iran is our mother. She gives us information, military supplies, and financial support." The Hamas combatant described in great detail the clandestine process of training, which begins with trainees illicitly crossing into Egypt, where they board flights to Damascus and then travel on to Tehran. There, in highly secured military encampments, they begin a rigorous 6-month training regime under the close supervision of Iran's elite Revolutionary Guards. They learn and perfect their skills in weapons operation, tunnel evacuation, booby trapping, sniper fire, advanced guerrilla tactics, and explosives and rocket manufacturing, like this homemade IED nicknamed Shawaz, which incorporates advanced technological know-how imported from Iran.
They also remain a country that is the primary funder for Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Look at any problem in the Middle East, Iran is funding insurrections.
Iran invests large sums of money in the dissemination of radical ideology, the manufacture and smuggling of weapons, and the provision of financial incentives to terrorists.
It is very clear that Hamas is being armed, and it's very clear that they're being armed in part by the Iranians.
Perhaps the most incriminating evidence of direct Iranian arms transfers to terrorist organizations was the interception of the ship Karine A in January 2002. The ship was carrying a cargo of $15 million worth of advanced weaponry to the Gaza Strip. Apart from its ideological objectives, Iran fosters the militant, subversive activities of its terrorist partners in order to divert international attention from its own illicit development program for nuclear weapons. Iran continues to supply enormous amounts of indigenously made weapons to Hamas by land and by sea. The 122-millimeter Grad rockets that rained down upon the cities of southern Israel during the recent round of hostilities, as well as various types of mortar shells, RPGs, and assault weapons, were manufactured in Iran and smuggled into the Gaza Strip through tunnels running beneath its border with Egypt in the Sinai Peninsula. The possibility of Hamas and Hezbollah operating under a future Iranian nuclear umbrella introduces unfathomable challenges and implications to an already foreboding environment.
رسالتي إلى اليهود الحاقدين فوالله الذي لا إله إلا هو سنلاحقكم في كل مكان فنحن قوم نشرب الدم وعلمنا أنه لا دم أطيب من دم يهود.
Hamas is merely one local chapter in the global network of radical Islam. As such, it is less familiar to Israel's Western allies in the struggle against terror. While its profile may be lower, it remains a fundamental element in the web of extremist organizations that continue to plague the world with barbaric acts of premeditated violence.
وكأنهم يقولون للعدو الصهيوني إننا نحرص على الموت كما تحرصون على الحياة.
The fanaticism that kills children, women, and men in New York, London, Madrid, Washington, and other cities around the world is the same fanaticism that kills people in Sderot, Ashkelon, Ashdod, and other Israeli cities and towns. Eradicating the threat to any state's right to live in security must be the shared responsibility of all those who fall victim to the vile attacks on humanity perpetrated by members of the terrorist brotherhood.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. There we saw the challenges that face Israel in the global fight against Islamic extremism. Jerry, we're at a very critical juncture in the history of the Middle East. Iran is very, very close to developing nuclear weapons. President Ahmadinejad has vowed to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. They already sponsor Hamas and Hezbollah. We know that the Israelis are very, very concerned, and thanks to WikiLeaks, the Arab states are also have raised concerns that Iran poses an existential threat to Egypt. And as the King Fahd of Saudi Arabia said, America needs to cut the head of the snake off. Is the international community, and the United States in particular, doing enough to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons?
That poses a very big question as to whether anybody's going to take on Iran militarily. The pressure on the international community is immense. The Russians and Chinese are very reluctant to take any action, But Netanyahu keeps on saying, look at the neighbourhood we're living in at the moment. Lebanon is unstable. Syria is very unstable. Jordan, nobody knows what's going to happen. Egypt, there have been riots involving the Christians, sadly, just recently. And there have been all sorts of problems in other areas as well. So the whole area, as far as Netanyahu is concerned, poses a major risk for Israel. And lots of this comes from Iran. And unless America really is strong enough to withhold the pressure from Russia and China, we're going to face a situation by which Israel still feels it may have to go it alone to preserve and protect itself. One interesting thing, the Palestinians want their state on the West Bank. There is a question mark over whether the area should be demilitarized or not. And having seen the effect of the rockets from Sderot into Israel, the rockets from the north of the hills and mountains in Lebanon into Israel, Israel is going to have to say that area must remain demilitarized, otherwise all its major population centres and some parts of Israel 9 miles wide are going to be at risk.
Joe, we're down to the final minute of the programme. What are the challenges facing the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu at this time?
He's a prisoner of the far right. It makes politically things very difficult for him. He's got his Likud party, where he's party leader. If he as much as breathes even towards Kadima, that's headed by Tzipi Livni, who thanks to the change in the law and universal jurisdiction was able to visit Britain just the other day. If he even breathes towards her, he might lose the leadership of his own party. If he loses that, he's no longer Prime Minister. So he realises that the far right, with Shas and Lieberman, the two parties, Israel Beitenu party, govern his policies, and he doesn't have the freedom, and that's why, unfortunately, sometimes he gets known as obstinate. But he is prepared to make changes for peace, and one day, hopefully, he'll be able to achieve that.
Joey, I just want to thank you very much for being my guest this week on today's Middle East Report, and thank you for bringing your insight, expertise and passion as well. And thank you for all you do on defending Israel in Parliament and in the media as well. So I just want to thank you for watching the Middle East Report. It's vital as Christians that we stand with Israel and the Jewish people in their hour of need. And I'm just going to finish with a song that reflects on the remarkable achievements that have been made by the Jewish state of Israel. Thank you and goodbye.